I think most of the companies that I've gone in to work with seemingly had a functional family. But here's the rub. What looked highly functional to me, there was a level of dysfunction that wasn't even being discussed. When you have a family business, and folks, listen, if you have the opportunity to have a family business, they're providing you with a platform for which you can grow and scale a business, and that has legacy. It's not your strategy, it's not finance, it's not your technology, it's your people and the health of your people and your team. Most families would say something like, if it weren't my kid or my brother, like I would have fired them a long time ago and I would have found someone to replace them.
Today, we are diving into the high stakes world of family businesses. Our guest is Jonathan Goldhill. He is a business coach and author of The Disruptive Successor. He works with second and third generation owners who feel constrained by the family business, but know that it's capable of so much more. And in this episode, we're going to unpack how Jonathan helps leaders clarify direction, build the right team, and create a business that both is more profitable and more enjoyable to run. Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Jake, thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely. Excited to have you. It's going to be fun. So, Jonathan, why don't you tell us a little bit about some of your background, about some of your experience? It sounds like you have done a lot of extensive work with, different types of programs like scaling up and traction and these different types of containers that you have helped to integrate into different businesses to then create your own system. And yeah, I just want to learn, more about some of the work that you've been doing, some of the clients you've been working with, and all the things.
Sure, sure. So, a little bit of backstory, right? So, I grew up in a family that my father worked in my grandfather's business, and my grandfather was in business with his uh, three other brothers and their father, and it was a very large business. And my father didn't last very long. Unfortunately, he died at a very young age. And when I was growing up, I always wanted to be a lawyer because I thought I was going to fulfill what my dad did. He went to Yale Law School. But then I realized probably about as quickly as he did that practicing law is really not very interesting. And when you have a family business, and folks, listen, if you have the opportunity to have to join a family business, they're providing you with a platform for which you can grow and scale a business, and that has legacy. And it's very interesting. So that was the backstory for me. For many years, I was involved as a consultant and an investor in some small companies in many different industries. Most of those investments followed the way most venture capital investments go. One was like pretty good, three were like marginally okay, and the other six basically kind of went sideways or nowhere, or lost my money. But I was always interested in small business consulting, and so after I went back to school after a quote unquote failed business venture because of the business partnership I was in, I went back to get an MBA in entrepreneurship with an emphasis on consulting, and then I spent the next 10 years after that building a consulting firm with a few other people, and we scaled that to a company that ultimately became a nationally recognized and nationally funded company. We got money from federal government, state government, city government, and county government to provide consulting, training, financing, workforce development, entrepreneurial training, small business loans to businesses. And then I decided that, after realizing that every business has some common problems and issues, and that instead of being a consultant and going in and offering a bespoke solution to every single client, that if you basically had a really good playbook, you could take people through a set of exercises, a set of growth tools that everyone's going to come up with a different output, but they all need to answer the same questions, like who's your ideal client, and what's that profile? And how do you interview people in the industry to find out what's going on in the industry? And you need obviously a scorecard and a leadership team and maybe a management team, and you need accountability or organization chart, and you need to have a meeting rhythm, and you need to have a strategy, and maybe you should do quarterly and annual and weekly meetings. So all that stuff started to make a lot of sense, and I became a coach in 2003 and have been coaching ever since. And so having been part of got certified in Rockefeller habits and scaling up, I saw what a robust set of tools that they had, over 60 growth tools, one page, single tools that will help you figure out your strategy, your people, your execution, your cash finance issues. And then got introduced to EOS, Entrepreneurial Operating System, through the book Traction, and realized, this was a simpler, more dumbed down, if you will, better for a larger group of people. And most of my clients, which were in the construction trades, most of whom were family businesses. And so, really, what I do today is largely implement some of those types of processes and tools, but it's layered on with the complexity of family dynamics. And family dynamics could be siblings, it could be successor and predecessor, father, daughter, father, son, mother, parents, child. And there's a whole lot of psychological, emotional, and just call it family dynamics that come into play. And I think that's what makes it really interesting. For me, these are difficult clients to invite. It's difficult for them to invite you in because oftentimes they don't want to share the secrets or of what's going on inside the family. They don't want to expose that. And oftentimes someone is really keen to talk about and get some help from an outside, and someone else is not keen at all to bring an outsider in. So, but once you get invited in and once they trust you, you become part of the family. And so what I discovered with working with so many folks in industries that were typically heavily family: construction, landscape, plumbing, heating and air conditioning, electrical contracting, that the loyalty was much greater. They really trusted you as an outside voice because I would say things that others had said in the family, but coming from me as an outsider who was looking at it, what seemingly more objective, suddenly the trust was like, yeah, we've been talking about that, and we should have been doing that, and I said that, or but suddenly it comes from a third party. It seems validated. So and by the way, and I'll wrap up with, I've worked in companies in many different industries. I've worked with venture-backed companies. I've worked with companies in SaaS, software as a service, technology. I've worked with families who had real estate as their assets. I've worked with mortgage and insurance companies. These types of businesses, I didn't find lent itself really well to the kind of coaching that I wanted to deliver, which was, how do we really think in terms of um, legacy, leadership, uh, and how do we innovate to keep the business fresh and vital, and so it would move on into the next generation, or that it was prepared to be sold. So anyway, that was probably a big preamble and a big answer to your question, but
That was great. That was a great context for everybody. So I mean, it sounds like it's not just, going into, what systems and hiring systems and, meeting frequencies. It's like you become a bit of the therapist in the room, coming into these businesses, seeing the dynamics, seeing what's working, what's not working, and incorporating those other things. And I mean, that's definitely a big task for sure. It's basically
definitely.
turning dysfunction into function, uh, Yeah, so it's very, very interesting. I'm sure you've had some interesting stories of difficult scenarios that you've had to help battle through. Anything that anything that really stands out as far as a really challenging thing that you have had to overcome inside of a business that obviously you can share?
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's start with the fact that I think most of the companies that I've gone in to work with seemingly had a functional family. But here's the rub, is that what looked highly functional to me, there was a level of dysfunction that wasn't even being discussed. And, Pat Lencioni, who I admire greatly, talks about this in a few of his books, but mostly The Five Dysfunctions of a Team, where he talks about artificial harmony and where there's a lack of constructive conflict or debate. And so many of my clients, I thought, this is not a highly dysfunctional family, this is a functional family, or maybe they've got an issue or two. But then it's like the chink in the armor, and suddenly it opens up and it's like a much bigger problem or issue. And so some of what um, I've had to negotiate or facilitate in my clients is candid conversations. That is the most important thing. I think the one word that is so important in all business, but in family business in particular, is communication and listening. And there's levels of listening. I used to do a workshop many years ago on the different levels of listening, and there's levels of communication. And so you've got to get away from artificial, fake, shallow communication. And it can't always be the critic. And, so you have to really balance constructive conflict and really lean into what that looks like. But I've had to deal with siblings who were scaling a business, one who wanted to build it and had rocket ship kind of vision and goals, the other who felt like, no, we shouldn't even be up in the air, we should be on the ground, and we need to pull this back. And so there was that tension between the two, one that really wanted to build, let's just say $100 million company, and the other was like, no, we should just stay at 8 or 10 million or 12 or grow slowly. And then I've had another case where I'm dealing with a client where one brother's the driving force, and usually I find that there's one of the children that usually is the driving force, and the others are they're either hanging on, they're trying to figure out what role they need to be in. Um, they're they're too afraid to leave the mothership, but they're too critical of the way the mothership is being run, and so it takes a while to go through this with family businesses. Most families would say something like, if it weren't my kid or my brother, like I would have fired them a long time ago and I would have found someone to replace them. But, so I have to try and level set these individuals who are leaders, the driving force of the business, and level set the person who's not really that engaged, and help the one who's not engaged to find a path for them to follow that fits their purpose, and give a roadmap for the champion who really wants to scale the business. And so at some level you have to treat family businesses like businesses and not family businesses, and at some level you have to be sensitive to the feelings and the emotions, um, and it is very much like business therapy, Jake. So
I guess in most cases you find yourself working on the actual family relationship rather than the actual business aspect of it. Because I
no,
see
I
that as the foundation.
my process is usually to approach it and say, like, this is the system, this is the structure, this is the processes that we need to put in place, and and we're going to even maybe use things like uh, uh, predictive index or disc and behaviors. Or we're going to have real clarity around what those roles are, and and you may not be the fit with the company in terms of the values, and you may not be a fit with the company in terms of the roles. But I'm not going to address it from the family. I'm not going to go into the dysfunction of the family first, like a psychologist, an organization development. I'm going to go in from the function of this is what best companies, world class companies put in place, and now let's see where how far off do you fall off of those best practices and why.
So you start by not treating them as family; you just treat them as just as part of that business in general.
I think so. I think for me, that's how I look at it.
Okay, so do you see the separation between the personal and the professional when it comes to business, to family businesses to be effective?
I think I will talk about their family issues in a private one-on-one coaching session. But when I'm working with the team, now we're focused on the issues, not the people, right? Unless we're talking about the people underneath them that are supporting them, and that then we might be talking about, their customer success manager or their customer service person. So I think that once they understand what makes for a successful business, then they can evaluate whether or not they're the right candidate or the right person in that business. And I've had people say, family members realize, you know what, everyone's going in this direction and I'm going in that direction. I'm not a fit. I've never been really a fit. I've always been kind of the black sheep or the ugly duckling or whatever. They don't use those terms, but they always think everyone's zigging and I'm zagging. And so maybe this isn't the place for me.
So basically, guide them to find their voice.
Exactly. And I give them the safe space in a one on one coaching session to talk about what is their wants and needs. I think what's really important, this is a really important exercise. It comes right out of scaling up, and it is to figure out what the purpose of this business is. I mean, Peter Drucker talked about it. The purpose of a business is not to make money. It's not to make a profit. That's an outcome, and that's important. There's lots of different ways of making money, and I tell people like, if you're doing this job, like you have lots of other alternatives. Like instead of mowing lawns, you could have been flipping hamburgers, but you chose to be outside doing this. So let's get clear about what a purpose is. I think young people. I was just giving a lecture to a young adult yesterday who was working on some um, algorithm to develop something around real estate, and I don't think he really understood exactly who his customer was. But I said, "Is this really what you want to do? Is this what you're meant to do? Is this what you're here for?" So I'm a big believer that I tapped into my calling at a young enough age that I think everyone needs to know what their purpose is. And so in a business context, I spend time with my clients figuring out what's the purpose of this business. And it usually is something beneath, it's always something beneath making a profit. It's something that really grabs people at the emotional level and makes them feel like they're really a part of something. And it's not about building homes, it's not about mowing lawns, it's not about fixing plumbing. It's about something deeper that everyone can connect to. And those who don't connect to it shouldn't be there.
So you said earlier about having candid conversations with people. Is that facilitating actual conversations and being like a almost like a therapist in the room, like, hey, you guys need to have a discussion about this. Let's have it. And then being like a mediator to kind of help navigate those conversations that they're actually had. Is that a part of what you're also doing?
I've done that a couple of times, but I don't fashion myself as a marital couples counselor or siblings counselor. So what I do is I teach them how to have a difficult conversation, and then I'll role play how to have that having that difficult conversation, and then I'll encourage them to go in to that person and have that difficult conversation, and so that can be a that I probably need to spend more time in that process with them, because some of it requires like developing your emotional intelligence, right? If I don't like something that you do, Jake, I don't just go in and blurt it out. That sounds almost autistic or something like that, right? Um, that's out on a different spectrum. I need to understand that I need to talk about what I like, that what you do that I really like, that I think is really great, a great contribution. And then I need to talk to you about when you did such and such, how it impacted me, how I felt, what, like, whether it frustrated me. And then I need to tell you what I'd really like to see is I'd like to see that it would be like this, or this is how I would need to have it be delivered. And then I'm going to wait for your feedback. Now, I just kind of boiled the 7 step process into something, a 7 step sequence into something that's like 3 or 4 steps. But, teaching people empathy and emotional intelligence is so important, because people don't really care what you think, or what you know. They care how much you care about them, and then they'll let you know what they think and what they know, and you can have a meeting of the minds and the meeting of the hearts. So so yes, I don't do it. I have done it with 2 people where I'm facilitating, but it's too much out of a playbook from marriage counseling and Harvard.
Yeah.
And I did that in my own therapy, and God bless people who want to do that. But so
Yeah, that seems a little intense,
it is intense.
but hey, I mean, sometimes it has to be done, unfortunately. I mean,
Okay,
sometimes
so
the com
a lot of people ask the question of getting feedback on what to do. So let's discover what's not to do. For example, what's one habit that almost guarantees that a family business will not make it to the third generation? Something that should not be done.
Um, don't communicate what you think or what you feel. Like, just keep it all bottled in, right? Don't communicate what you think would be a new product, or a new market, or an innovation, or a technology, or an enterprise software that you think could be introduced. Like, not communicating, not that's not leading. Leading requires communication, and it requires consistency. So again, I get back to this: communication is the most important thing, and it's not your strategy. I'm going to kind of loosely quote Lencioni again, but it's not your strategy. It's not finance. It's not your technology. It's your people and the health of your people and your team. It's leadership that makes for a great company. Um, the proof is in the pudding. I think Jim Collins did the research in a couple of his books where, it's not a charismatic leader. It's someone who's the level, what he called the level 5 leader, someone who's really listening and taking in and understanding what it is that the market wants, his employees want, his customers want. And so I think if you want a family business that's going to last from one generation to the next, you need to be talking about money. You need to be talking about ownership. You need to be talking about taxes. You need to be talking about, equity. You need to be having conversations around debt. You need to be having conversations around what's going to improve this business, you know. And if you're not having those types of conversations, if the next generation of leaders are not being developed, if they're not being encouraged to bring new ideas to the table, game over.
How involved are you getting typically with these businesses, and how many of them can you take on at a time? Because it sounds like you have to be all in, learning about all of the main key roles and really building
Yeah.
relationships with each of them. And then really, I mean, you're like the puppet master, essentially trying to navigate this realm of turning dysfunction into function in different areas. Obviously there's these are functioning businesses, but there still are so many gaps that family businesses will usually have. And how many of these companies are you able to usually handle at any given time?
Yeah.
How involved?
So
Yeah.
look, I think for me, handling anywhere from 6 to 12 clients at a time is a good load. So let's call it 8 to 10. Understanding that some of these are going to be family engagements where I'm working with the whole team. Some of them are going to be where I'm just really coaching the owner or the CEO, and they're introducing some of the same concepts that I'm teaching to the team. They're the ones who are introducing it. So they're, let's call it, self-implementing, if you will, some of the ideas and tools that I'm bringing to the table. And so because those might only be a couple hours a month, and another client might be 16, a couple days a month. So a top level coach doing, I think, what I do, they can handle as many as 20 or maybe even more clients in a month, but then they're going to be really limited to doing the annual and quarterly sessions and some one-on-one check-in calls. Uh,
Yeah.
my process is to get is to require one-on-one be part of it, and those can be as little as 2 hours to as much as 1 to 2 hours per team member per month. So I think that answers your question.
Yeah, and how long are these engagements typically?
So my engagements are month to month when I'm dealing with a solo individual, and their minimum 90-day commitment when I'm dealing with a team, and then a team engagement. Some last I've had them be as short as 6 months. I've had them average sometimes between 18 and 24 months. And then I've had clients who have gone for 10 years through, but gradually ramping up from one on ones to working with others one on one in the company to then doing quarterlies and annuals. And then, eventually they graduate. So, I would say on average, 41 months is my average tenure for a client.
41
So,
months. What is
so
that? 4 years?
it's 3.5 years.
Yeah, that's that's
That's
solid.
that's impressive.
Yeah.
Thank
Okay,
you.
so I have an interesting question talking about leaders. Which do you think is more dangerous for a business? Like a super controlling leader or just like a checked out successor?
A checked out leader, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Super controlling versus checked out. I mean, do you have an idea? I don't know that I've
I mean, I'm
I
sitting right here and I was like, Jonathan is the guy to answer this for me.
well, yeah, look, they're both super problematic, right? I've
That is
had
true.
clients. I'm working with someone now who's somewhat checked out a lot of the time because of, let's say the business has seasonality and they're not that active during the off season. and they do check-ins, but it's very sporadic. And then when they show up during the season, now they're like they're all in, and they want to be all out. Part of it because it was much better, like it was much easier not having the headaches than suddenly having
They
the
got
headaches.
used to it. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, on the flip side, you have people who are very controlling, and I'm seeing less and less of that leadership style. Look, Gen Zs, millennials have pushed up against that leadership style. It's it's even falling off in the military, maybe to some degree. Although I don't coach anyone in the military, but that kind of command and control style is so outdated. It's so 1950s, 60s, 70s, and yet, look, we still see it today in America. In politics and government. We have, but it's a little bit more. It's a little different, a little more chaotic. So I think what happens with a command and control leader is that people feel micromanaged and they feel undermined. They feel like they're not really going to develop. And at some point, those who get fed up leave. Um, but they also do things that can be very disruptive. Or, I mean, because that's just nobody wants to be managed like that. And then on the flip side, when you have someone who's not there at all, you have like a country club environment where there's no one at the membership desk checking you in or checking you out, and I say the inmates are running the asylum. That's like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, where everyone's kind of if you know the movie, the
So
crazy
basically,
people
both ends of the spectrum are
are
talent repellents. They
are
just
what,
repel talent.
they're what?
They're talent repellents. They repel talent.
Yes, they're talent repellents. Exactly. People don't want the former and the latter. What happens is you'll find there's superstars that try and run the whole place, um, but superstars don't build franchises, do they? I mean, can you think of I mean, unless you have multiple superstars and they learn to work together. But I'm a fan of basketball more than other sports, team sports. And, you know, you can have a bunch of people that have no superstars and they play so well together, they can outperform the team that has three superstars or aging Hall of Famers. You know,
The power of
superstars.
effective collaboration.
Exactly.
So,
It gets back
so
to that quote. It's not about your strategy, it's not about your playbook, it's about your team and the how healthy and how strong and integrated and you know.
so Jonathan, what would you say are some obvious signs or symptoms that a business could have where it does make a lot of sense to bring somebody like you on?
So, okay, so one we've kind of talked about, you're not having the conversations you need to be having. And or there's a lot of emotion in what's going on in the business. There's frustration, there's resentment, there's fighting. Um, if you're not growing, if your sales, your revenues are stuck, they're plateaued. That would be another reason. If your products or services are plateaued, you're not expanding into new markets, developing new product ideas, you're not being innovative or leading in that area. That could be another example of where the family is not talking about what they need to be talking about, or the business and is not talking about what they need to be talking about. Um, so those are a few examples. I think also at a time when you probably as the owner are or owners are thinking about how do I exit this business and pass it on to the next generation, or you're a next generation leader, a Gen Z, a millennial, and you're thinking, how do I get my pops who's a baby boomer, um, to kind of let go and let me step up. And how do I gain some more ownership and more decision making authority? Um, so those are all scenarios that I see.
And when you started an engagement, what is usually your first objective?
So as I start going into leading with family engagements, it's really a discovery and an assessment phase. I want to understand who's who in the organization, meaning like who's family, who's not. What are the roles and responsibilities? Are they clear about them? Um, do they have organizational structure? Do they have a good design around the organization? Do they? Does everyone know what that design is? And I will want to understand, do they have scorecards? Do they have meetings? How productive are those meetings? Do they have priorities around what they want to accomplish in the next 90 days, in the next 1 year, 3 years, 5 years? So these are things that I'm doing during discovery process. And the discovery might look more like people, processes, and systems, but it also could look like more about who the people are if it's in a succession situation. Um, so it's rarely that I'm looking. I'm never really looking at their technology. I'm not looking at their security platform or system. I used to look at their finances. I'm less looking at their finances and knowing in terms of where we could improve that. But I think that's always a great area if you can get them some return on investment immediately, right? That's like doing what you do is like, hey, if I can help you improve your exposure and get more leads and generate more clients, and if I can help you with your closing or your entire sales process, that's really quantifiable. What I'm doing, leadership development, succession planning, exit planning, planning for a sale, not as quantifiable.
Yeah, but you're like the aspirin, you're not as much as or I mean, it sounds like you do still obviously help a lot more with the growth, but it's more of there's a pain that is being experienced with you know the communication, and you are providing a much more clarity around the function of the whole team and the business in general. That's what it sounds like, you
Yep.
know. And so for these bigger businesses, it's not always about growth. It's about how can we not want to kill each other, which makes
Yeah.
sense. Makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense.
Yeah. I mean, businesses have like three, there's three outputs, right? There's the profit that a business generates. There's the enterprise value that the business is either increasing, decreasing, or staying the same. And then there's the cash that's actually being produced that can be reinvested into the business or could be put into some other asset to diversify. So looking at those three outputs is really important for business owners.
And what are some of the biggest turnarounds or success stories or results that you've uh, done within your career? And you don't obviously have to share specific clients, but I'm just curious, with some of your work, um, yeah, what have you been able to achieve?
Yeah. Um, so when I started my career as a consultant, which is back almost 30, 40 years ago, I used to work with some small businesses that literally were in crisis and had it needed to be turned around. And I have to say that those were really difficult. And I don't know that I can remember too many successes in those companies. Uh, then there's always this. Uh, I mean, my best and classic case study success story is a client whom I worked with for 10 years, up until just a few months ago, who I'm still talking with, have a relationship with, who's now gone on to become a coach himself and a motivational speaker, telling about his journey, talking about a lot of the things that I talked about. And he took his company where, as I showed up on the scene, he was just transitioning from the vice president and project manager in a family business to getting the title 6 months later after we worked together to becoming the CEO. And as the CEO, he took this mom and pop business that was $1.5 million in revenues, and he scaled it to over $20 million. And he's really literally the disruptor in my book, Disruptive Successor. He's the person I talk about a lot in the book. And he went on. Not only has he given out many copies of my book to other people, but he's gone on to create a community called the Disruptors. And he's in the trades industry where he's got a lot of members, and he's talking about innovation, automation, AI. He's talking about um, understanding financials, understanding the role that private equity and you know people who are buying companies in that industry. He's really become a leader and a force, and I'm very proud of who he's become. And he took a very different path from some of the other high school dropouts that he was hanging out with, where he could have gone down a road that wasn't very pretty, so very ugly. And so he's really made a success of himself. So that's a great case study. But also always the relationships that I develop with people, if they're still in relationship with me and they're still talking, that to me is always a really good sign of success. You know.
Of course. So, Jonathan, how can people reach you? And do you have any selfless or selfish plugs that you want to share with anybody that's listening?
Sure. So I do have a podcast called Disruptive Successor. I have a book called Disruptive Successor. The best way to reach me is either through LinkedIn, or and under my name, or go to my website, thegoldhillgroup.com. And there's free ebooks, there's free videos. Some of it's current, some of it's dated. There's a new ebook I have called The Family Business Trap: 11 Uncomfortable Truths That Will Save Your Business and Your Relationships. But just reach out with an email, john@thegoldhillgroup.com.
Cool. Awesome, John. Well, thanks again for jumping on. This was super value packed, and yeah, thank you.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you very
Thank
much
you.
for your time.
All
And
right.
you need a hat with the disruptive successor instead of
Yeah, I
the.
do.
I mean,
Yeah.
chasing sunshine is good.
I'll
Yeah.
take
Well,
anything sunshine.
I'm in LA and I'm just enjoying the sun right now. So it's great.
Awesome, love to hear it.
All right.
Cool.
Okay, awesome.